So the thing I want to focus on tonight is testing React, but we're going to be using a specific library to test that, which is React Testing Library. I think now has become sort of the de facto testing library for React. When I first got into it. Yes.
You're not in camera.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, or that side of the podium is going to be better. Yeah.
Is this better?
Yeah.
All right. So now it's kind of become the de facto testing library for React. When I first found it, I think Kent Dodds was the creator. It'd been out for a month, and I'm like, well, this is awesome. Told all of my coworkers. We started writing all of our new components and our new UIs with this library, and now it's taken off, which was really cool. I think at one point I wrote a blog, and I was like the #1 blog for React Testing Library. Now I'm like 50 people down the list, so it's pretty funny. So one thing I really like about this library is it really enforces behavior-driven development. And Kent Dodds has a guiding principle for this. He told me anytime I talk about React Testing Library or write about it, I'm supposed to share this, so here we go. And basically, the more your test resembles the way your software is used, the more confidence they can give you, which I think is a really good guiding principle. Has anyone joined a front-end app and there's test in the app, if there's even test in the app, and you try to change one piece of code and all the tests break and you have no idea how to actually move around that code, what you should actually keep, what you shouldn't keep, should you just throw it all away? That's one thing that I think is really cool about this principle is you're focusing on the UI as it is for a user. No matter what the implementation is, it should still behave the same way for you. So we're going to build. I'm going to do some live coding for this event. So fingers crossed, knock on wood, this is going to be okay. So what we're going to do is imagine for a moment your product manager comes up to you and says, hey, that app we just built last week, we now need to add the recent tweets for our company in the right-hand side. So you need to build that component. So that's kind of the preface of what's going on here. So we're going to build a very simple recent tweets feed that's going to be on here. I use React Testing Library for our mock data, so just a little prep. And now we code. If anybody wants to follow along on their computers if they have it open, this is the repo to grab it. But I will move on, because I think we'll have enough with just coding here. So let me exit out of here and pull up this. So if we take a look at this component real fast, can everybody see this? Let me present one more time. So we kind of look at this component. Realize I cannot actually do that. It's kind of broken up into some smaller segments. There's a list of tweets, but then there's the individual tweets that have like a profile and some headers and some content. So the way I want to break this down first is I'm actually going to write some tests and build these individual tweet cards, is what I'm going to call them. And then we'll move on to actually building the entire list. So in the code, I've got this simple little tweet card component. At the moment, it does ... And what we're going to do is we're not actually going to test this out in the browser. We're just going to do this in code. So the first thing I'm going to do is look for this tweet card test file. I don't actually have it. So let me make a tweet card .test.js file. And within here, can everybody see the screen okay? We're going to import React here, since we're going to be writing JSX inside of our test. And we're going to import some functions from the React Testing Library. The one that we care about here is a render. That's the only one I'm going to pull from for now. We'll get some later, but that's the primary one we want for now. So we're going to describe this tweet card. And the one thing that we want to do, if we go back to that image real fast, let's see if I can make this bigger whenever I go back. So the one thing I want to test here first is that, hey, it loads this profile photo for the user. So I'm going to say, hey, for some reason that happens, it loads, it renders the tweeters, I'm going to call them tweeters, profile pic. So how are we going to do this? So the first thing that I have here in this is I'm going to grab this little bit of data that I copied over for the presentation. This user called Alexa that has a thing saying, hey, testing React is hard. So we're going to set this to a variable, and we're going to call this Alexa. Or actually, let's call this tweet info. And that's our object with the create information, its unique ID, some text, which is the tweet portion, as well as some information about that user. So what I can do here is, before I can test anything, I need to mount this component into a virtual DOM, or the testing DOM. So what I can do here is, just going to do this for ignoring the moment, is use that render method that I brought in from React testing library. And this takes in an argument of a component. So I can grab that tweet card component and render. And if I do something like, let's just call this container, we can actually console log this, and it gives us a collection of elements. So let me run a yarn test command. Tweet card test. I should actually import this component. That might be useful. So look at these elements that it gave us here. There is a container element, which is basically the entire DOM. And then there is these little helper methods that we can use to query HTML, image tags using like the alt text thing here. Labels, we can find labels for forms. There's a lot of little query methods that can happen here that'll query that individual component that we just mounted with our render command right here. So since we care about getting an image, to follow the rules of kind of making sure that your UI is accessible, a big UI portion for an image tag is the alt property. So instead of there being like get by source or get by image, there's a method here called get by alt text. So we're going to use that one for our test. And I'm going to remove our log here. And I'm also going to run our watcher is on. So as we write this test, we can continue watching the test. So instead of this container, I'm going to grab the get by alt text method. And I'm going to say our image is going to be get by alt text. Now we're not going to make our alt text the same as the profile image URL. I'll probably do something like maybe name profile, or maybe screen name profile. And then I'm going to expect that this image has a source property that is equal to this profile image URL. I think this is broken. I need to do tweetinfo.user.screenName. Too many N's in my life. All right, so here we go. Tweetinfo.user.screenName. And I should have a failing test. So this is one thing that I really enjoy about this library. It tells me that it's unable to find an element with the alt text of Alexa code's profile. And it shows me a representation of the DOM as it's mounted now. So you're looking like the element source code inside of like Chrome or whatever would look just like this, which I think is really awesome. That was what actually led me to use this library over any other one. Hopefully you enjoy it too. If you guys are using this library or interested in using it. So this tells me, hey, there's not even an image on here. So it fails at this get by alt text. So since we're doing kind of a TD style of coding at the moment, I could easily go in here and add a image with source and alt tag, and I could cheat and just do screen name, was it Alexa codes profile? And that'll load the image. Now my DOM actually shows to equal tweet image. It did find it now. Look where it failed. It failed at the actual image source because there's an empty string, which makes sense. So I could have said that I expect it to equal Alexa codes. It's not actually what I want it to be. It should be The URL here, I think if I remember right, is, give me 1 second. I have some helper code. This tweeter link, that's what we're going to call this, tweeter link. So that's going to go to their twitter.com and then use their screen name to go to that next URL. So we're going to say this now goes to our tweeter link variable. Cool, thank you. So screen name is not defined. So screen name is not defined because we're not actually caring about those props. Remember we went back to our test. We were passing tweet card. Now the idea is I'm going to be passing actual tweet information to this component. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this tweet info that I have here. I'm going to spread that around and give it tweet info. If I go back to my card here, I can add a user and screen name using destructuring. And I think that this is going to give me a better error. So now you can see that it did find that URL. So my test is now wrong because my test needs to be expecting basically this value again. I'm just going to copy that over from here. Tweeter link. Screen name is not defined. Tweet info.user.screen name. Sweet. So we now have the first test passing. We have the profile pic. The next thing that we want to do is test that there's actually like the user's name on here. So this should be a pretty easy test to write. I'm going to actually grab this tweet info, put it up a little bit higher in the scope. And then we're going to go in here and goes, it renders the tweeter's name. I'm going to grab this code here. The thing is, though, is now we don't actually care about an image. We care about text. So one of the other helpers that we get here is called get by text. And we can do this expectation, get by text, to return our tweet info.user.name, which should be Alexa. And we should expect that to be truthy. So it should exist on the DOM somewhere. Sweet. So again, we're getting that DOM markup, and Alexa is not on here. So back to our tweet card, we can go on here. We'll add a div, and inside that div will go the name of the user. So we're going to destructure this. I'm going to open this up a little bit. The name attribute as well. And now we've rendered the tweeter's name. So following this process, we know that we care about the additional at future Joanie, and we care about this text. So I can go here. It renders the tweeter's handler with link. So I can get by text, and here I want to grab the user's screen name. Again, got the extra N. It's not actually finding the screen name anywhere here. So I could go back here and then basically kind of, I'll put this in a span tag. Screen name. And it did find it, but we didn't really verify that was a link. And another thing to notice is we don't really have that at symbol beforehand. So how do we test for that? So I'm going to add this at here. And notice this fails now. This is within a span, but it's not matching correctly. Well, we could simply look for this by doing get by text, and I think this works in JavaScript. Alexa's code, hold on. I could just do this, right? If you use this like regex here, it'll actually just look that it exists on there, but we still care about the add existing. So it's like a feature set. We should write this as we expect it to be displayed. So we're going to use template literal here again in JavaScript and do tweet info dot user dot screen name. And now we're getting that information. But this really wasn't our test. We didn't care that it just existed. We cared that this was a link. So the thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually call this our link element. So that's going to get this by text. I'm going to close this a little bit. So we have our link. And what's the thing that we care about most on a link? The href. If the href doesn't go where we want it to go, it's a failed link. So now what we can do is we can do an expect on link.href dot to equal this tweeter link. Sorry, this wasn't right. I messed up something on this profile pic. 1 second. We're going to go back and fix a broken test. So we expect this to equal the tweeter link, which it won't. So going back to our tweet card, we're now going to actually make this an A tag instead of a span tag. And then in the href, we can pass in that tweeter link. Now I did fail before. I was using tweeter link here for this image tag, but I was actually supposed to be passing it the profile image URL. So failure on my end, sorry about that. Tweet info dot user. Now this one is breaking, saying, hey, we expected that we would get this test.com, but we received here. So the easy fix, jumping back to our card, is change this to equal that image, what's it called? Profile image URL, which we need to destructure from here, from that nested user object, and then drop this in here as our profile image URL.
That's the href for the link. You need to update the image source, right?
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
So renders the tweeter's handler with a link. And the last thing that we can care about is the actual text. I'm just going to do a nice copy paste. The tweet's text. We don't need this anymore. We're going to get by text again. And one thing that's really cool is you don't actually have to write this expectation with this library. You can just do get by text. And if you give it bad text, that's going to fail the test. Because it can't find it. So we could write the expectation around here, get by text, and expect that to be truthy, or you can shorthand it and just do get by text. That's a hot debate on our team on what one we do there, but you can do either one. I'm just going to write this as an example of what you can or should maybe not do. So tweetinfo.user not user, but text. It wasn't able to find that. So let's just add a simple little div down below. This one, we'll put this in a p tag, and we'll call this the text. And I also need to destructure this text object here, or this text variable. Sweet. So we've covered most of this. For sake of time, I'm not going to worry about the actual date time there, but we are going to go on rendering the entire list. Now this is where things get a lot more complicated, because this was just a simple, it's kind of a functional function. If you're familiar with functional programming, basically what you pass to it is what you get back. There's no weird side effects, there's no calling an API, there's no waiting for DOM events. This was a pretty easy thing to test with relatively short code. If I go here and run like yarn test coverage, this component should be pretty, hold on. Doesn't like all the extra characters. This component should be fully tested. Look at that. We have 100% coverage here. There's not a single line of code within this component that hasn't been touched in any way whatsoever. Functions, statements, branches, and lines. So with a very minimal amount of code, we were able to get full coverage on that one simple component. But as we move into the world of the actual list of tweets, this is where it gets complicated. How are we with time?
You're good.
Cool. All right. So let's move on to the next thing. I think I have a file where I need to create one. We're going to call this our recent tweets feed.test. And I'm going to grab a little bit of this information from here. Test. There we go. And here we're going to grab the component recent tweets feed. And just like last time, we can describe this component. And say, hey, it renders a collection of recent tweets. And we're going to say get by text again, because that's a good way to get some information quickly. The test that I want to do here is be like, hey, let's check that the text renders for at least 2 tweets that we stub out or mock out. So to do that, we can first render this recent tweets component. And I'm not actually going to be passing props to this time, because this recent tweets feed is going to be in charge of looking for the data from, we're going to have our mocked out Twitter API. So since that's the case, no props we pass here, and the component will have some side effect in it that will then make a call for the tweets from Twitter, and then render them back to us. So asynchronous programming is hard. Asynchronous testing, I tend to find, is even a little bit more difficult. So we're going to run into some issues here. So if I go in here, and let's assume that we're going to have 2 users. So I'm going to grab this mock tweets array. And we now have Alexa from our last test, as well as Kylo Ren. Since Star Wars came out, I thought I would put a small Star Wars reference in there. So Alexa that's in the testing react is hard, and then Kylo that's like it's fun. So, sorry, that was a lame joke. I'm a dad. We have others. So my recent feeds test, I'm going to grab this variable, say, hey, we have these mock tweets, we want them. So knowing that I'm hoping to stub out this mock tweet so that when the API calls, this is what gets returned, I'm going to say, hey, let's get by text this tweets, what's it, my mock tweets. I'll give this a better name. We'll just call these tweets. I'm going to say, hey, tweets, and it's going to grab the first item in that array of users, and we're going to expect some text. And then I'm going to grab the second one, and again, some text. And we get failures. We get failures because one is my component only says code is coming. So we can easily solve that problem. And I'm actually going to show you, does anybody still use old class components, or do they only want to see the hooks version of this? Hooks? I can do both. I got both examples pretty quickly if you guys want to see it. Just use hooks. Okay, cool. So we're going to return this, and I'm going to say, hey, there is a div that's here. I have some CSS stuff. If you guys want to see what this looks like pretty-wise, I have some branches on my PR that you can check it out on. But right now, we're going to imagine there's some tweets character, and we're going to map over some tweets. And from there, I can now call that tweet card element, pass in some tweet data, and give it a key of like the tweet.id. Yeah, tweets is not defined. That's pretty good test. So here, I'm just going to grab these tweets. We're going to simplest path first. Well, what if I just make tweets live right here outside this function? Okay, tweet card is not defined. Let's import that tweet card. Passed. They all passed. We have tweets. Now, we're not going to hard code these tweets when we build an app, so we're going to delete those tweets. And we're going to say that we're going to grab some tweets from something I have here called the use recent Twitter tweets hook. And I built this because I didn't feel like hacking away at a hook while you guys were all watching, but I'll just give you a slight example of what's going on here. So I have a Twitter API thing. Don't worry about the implementation, it just works. But basically, from there, you can call get recent tweets. But we're using a hook here called use recent tweets. 2 pieces of state. Typically, when I go to 2 or 3, I start using like use reducer, but for simplicity here, we have tweets and this function called set tweets. Then we have a has error and a set has error thing, which are going to be the 2 variables that we make accessible to the subscribers of said hook. So right here, I can grab tweets, and I can also grab a variable called has error. And the default value for has error is false, and the default value for tweets is null. So then when this thing gets run the first time, we're going to hook into this use effect. It is some safety here to handle like the unmounting and mounting of components. So I use this thing I learned from Dan Abramoff about like has stopped or is active. There's a lot of different ways you can say this. But basically, I just check before I actually make a call to my API that the component's still around that subscribe to this. And once I get the response back, I also check again, hey, is this component still around? Because if I call set tweets, we'll start to get in this weird memory leak scenario where it's calling state on components that don't exist. And then I've never seen it break anything, but it probably will. You'll get lots of warnings in your console. And then if we get a bad response back, I'm just logging that error, and then I'm going to set has error. So long story short, this gives us 2 values, tweets and has error. Tweets is no value, and has error is false. So I'm going to do a thing, be like, hey, if there's tweets, then load this tweet map. But if there's not, let me break this down so it's a little bit easier to see on this smaller screen. But if there's not, then don't actually load anything here. Cool. An update React tweets feed inside a test was not wrapped in act. Since this is a function that uses effects, we need to worry about act. Now, act is pretty simple to use. You can import that from here. Something that is kind of unique to the hook version of this versus the class base of this is act is a helper that verifies that every state change that's possible in a component has cycled through before they unmount the component in the test. So it's sort of a safety thing that's there, and it's pretty easy to work around. There wasn't great documentation around working around this for a while, but there's quite a few out there now. So if you run into this, just Google, how do I test an asynchronous hook component, and you'll probably find the answer now. But for the first couple of months, that was not the case, and this was a pain in the butt to do. But basically, I'm going to wrap all of my code inside of a wait and do the exact same thing here. Basically, what that will verify is that for the state changes that'll happen, when this is fully over, it'll then unmount the component, and it will wait for you. So that should solve our act error, which is true. And now we have the tweets here. The other thing that we want to kind of worry about too is what happens if like this is a response that will work sometimes because It's not really calling a real API. I lied. It's not going to Twitter right now. It's going to a mock thing that I built. But ideally, it's going to take time for those tweets to actually come back. So the thing that I want to test now, though, is I want to test that there's kind of a loading state before we get there. So we're going to say it renders a loading message while fetching tweets. And within here, we don't need to make this an async yet. I'm going to say get by text loading. Now this should be a failing test. Cool, wasn't wrapped in act. That's fine. We'll come back to that in just a moment. And we now have this case where if there's tweets, do this. But we're going to add another case. If there's not tweets, then we could actually, let's add it here first. Loading. Okay, test passed. Act as a warning. It doesn't fail, but the test does pass. So we're in a loading state first because tweets is a null value at first. When this comes back as a value, it'll then do this. Now, if I take, I'm going to go crazy from, I'm actually going to take this await thing out for a moment. Now notice that when that await's gone, we actually have a failed test again. It wasn't able to find that text. So what await does with this async is it basically goes through all of the ticks with a different state of the component and will run it every time there's a tick. So everything inside of here will run for each tick that runs with inside of your app. So we didn't have to wait for get by text because this thing ran it once. Hey, something changed, run it. Something changed, run it. So we had a benefit there of everything working for us. The other trick around that is we could have said, hey, wait for element here. And that will actually wait for the first one to pop up before it does anything. Wait for element is not defined, but I have to actually import wait for element. And now we're waiting. So much waiting. Boom. So tweet 0 text is here. Tweets 1 text is here. So this is interesting. This wasn't a problem, but now it's a problem. Our first test was actually a false positive. We didn't actually wait for that element to appear because we ran through the async, but it didn't run anything through there. At the first state, when async await or act async await actually happened, nothing was there to actually test. So I was like, okay, we'll just move on. So it was a bad test. But now that we've added this case of awaiting for an element, we can add back to this again. And we'll still get a failure because the element hasn't existed. Why is this working? It's the troubles of live coding. This shouldn't be working. Let's actually pull back to not adding this real fast. And I'm gonna drop this inside of await. Cool. So that should get rid of our warning there. Cool. I need to add async here. So now we're back to the original error that never loads. Cool, unable to find the element that we were looking for. So what I can do here is I'm actually going to stub out my Twitter API. And I'm going to import that because I want to control what's actually being returned from that at the test level. So I'm going to import, I think this is in my services, and then Twitter API. And before I actually render this component, I'm going to say Twitter API dot get recent tweets is actually going to return a jest.function, which is a mock, or actually a stub. And we're going to say this is promise.resolve, and we're going to say it's going to return that list of tweets that we've hard-coded up here. And now we have a pass test. So basically what it is, I bypassed actually calling a network call and told it to get us the list of tweets that I say to get. So stub that out for simplicity and time, and now the test runs in 1 second, and we load the list. Now, if I do yarn test coverage again, we get full coverage with the current state that we have inside of there. Now, if I ran yarn test on the entire thing, you'll notice that something we didn't handle was what happens when there's actually an error. I can go over error if we have time. If not, I can close this off, but I think we're good on that. If you guys want to see how to handle the errors, that is in the repo. But it's pretty fun to write. It's kind of cool. Like, you don't really have to jump into any UI and test that implementation out because you get that DOM printout. So typically what I do, I'll write everything and then I'll jump back on the DOM and spend like an hour or 30 minutes, whatever it is, for the CSS portion of that. And the thing that was cool about this is, if you noticed in all of these tests, I never once checked for class elements or ID elements or data attributes or anything like that. I checked for things that users would see, like text elements, alt tags for accessibility or screen readers, links that users see. So no matter how I change this, I could completely remove that tweet card component, call it something else, and everything will work on this recent tweets feed. I can change that implementation around. So for me, that's a big win.
Can you simulate things like button clicks and users interacting with the components?
You can. So if, for example, we did something here, let's say like there's a button, right? And we call this help. And let's say within here, this handle help. And then we get to on click. This will handle help. And we'll say, hey, console.warn, please help me. Okay? So within our test, we can do something simple like describe help button. And we can say, I'm going to have to wrap this again, this await function. And we're going to say this is our button. And that button's called help. Cool. Sweet. So returns a promise from describe is not supported. Describe. Oh, it. Thank you. It warns someone. And inside of here, we'll drop that code. We have our button, so that passed. I'm going to just use regular yarn. So what we can do here is there's actually a API called fire event. And from fire event, we can say .click that button. Thing is, though, is like we need to test what actually happens here. I think that I have some helper code to actually, just because I don't have this off the top of my head. No, I don't.
Oh, that's all right.
That's all right. Basically, what I would do there is I would basically do a test of like mock console warn, see if it was actually called with that information. But you can totally do that. Yeah, it's a pretty easy to use API. Kind of do that. It's like you can also, like, if you have like an input, you can be like fire event. What's it called? You can drag, you can focus. Set the invits on there. You can do some length. There's all kinds of things that are on there, and you just pass it the element you're going to do it. So if you want to do, I think it's like mouse down or mouse leave, you could do some very interesting things with that. But cool. Any other questions? You guys are all masters? All right. Well, thank you on that. You guys want to follow along, this is accessible. I do have some resources as well if you guys want to find out some things. And if anybody ever wants to, if you guys ever have testing questions, please reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn or something. Always looking for new challenges on how to solve some problems. So definitely using me as a resource if anybody needs to. That's it.